nursing education from Capella and is a certified nurse educator. She has a master's degree in online learning design and technology. Nancy has multiple clinical nursing and academic nursing faculty and leadership positions. She's taught and created courses spanning the undergraduate to graduate nursing level and has served as primary author for over 50 courses in the online setting. She served as primary author of a study guide for nurses and volunteers in service of the nursing profession through her work as author, peer reviewer, and an accreditation site reviewer, team leader. You've got lots that's going on there, Nancy. She's the founding academic program director for new nursing programs being developed at Columbia Southern University, where she serves as principal course developer and curriculum designer, who possesses a high level of proficiency and student-centered approach to curriculum development, design, building, and delivery. So, Nancy, we're happy that you're here with us, really excited that you took the time to pull things together. I think, Tracy, you've got a little something that you're going to share with us related to our nurse trust information.
Yeah, just a few slides here that you can run through, Warren, just to kind of center us all on things that are happening around nurse trust.
Great. And Yolanda Nazil, you just joined us. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Elaine.
Yes.
Elaine, we're glad you're here. Thanks for being with us.
My pleasure.
And if I missed anybody else, we'll make sure to welcome you later. I see Gaia Danielle is here, Christy Grabowski, and Sylvia Mondragon. We're glad that you're all here. The Nurse Trust organization, our mission is to inspire and enable nurse leaders to grow and collaborate and transform health equity, and healthcare. Our vision for Nurse Trust is that we amplify nurse leaders' impact on health equity, and health care. And we certainly want you to get involved in Nurse Trust. We've got lots of different work groups and committees. I'm happy to have someone join on this particular group with the Trusted Conversations. But as you can see, we've got a list of different groups there, and maybe we can put that up a little bit later. I won't read through them all, but we'd love to have you join. If you're not part of Nurse Trust already, we'd love to have you. And these Trusted Conversations are also a great way for us to connect with everyone. In our next member meet and greet, we do that periodically. It's an opportunity to come together and get a chance to get to know the other folks that are involved. And our annual summit is going to be March 23rd to 25th of 2025. It's going to be in Charlotte, North Carolina. So hope you consider joining us. And if you have a desire to contribute to Nurse Trust, we've got that link there. And go ahead and click on that code. So with all of that done, it seems I went a little out of order there, Nancy. I was anxious to get you started and gave your bio right on the front end of all of that. But we're glad you're here with us. And again, excited that the rest of you are all here. Nancy, go ahead and get us started about empathy.
Thank you all. Welcome. Good afternoon. It is a privilege and an honor to be here to go over a little bit about what I've learned along the way regarding promoting an empathetic learning experience for nurses. You know, you'll see later on in the slides, I'll be talking a little bit about vulnerability, and like to share with you that in my experience as a nurse, I came to nursing late in life. I shared with Warren and Tracy earlier that I was late, 38 years old, and was at a retirement dinner for a nurse she said, so my husband and I just sold our business. She said, okay, so what are you going to do now? And I said, I'm not really sure. She said, well, why don't you become a nurse? I looked at her like she was crazy and said, yeah, okay. I'm a nurturer by nature. So she knew that about me. So I couldn't sleep that night. She put the bug in my ear. I was on the internet, back in the days when it was dial-up, and I was on the community college website, and before you know it, I was enrolled in my first class. And as I told Tracy and Warren, as I walked on the campus as a 38-year-old woman with 3 boys, it was like the pathway was made of gold, because I was clutching that sociology book, and I was so excited because as a young girl, I couldn't go to college. I had to take care of siblings. So this was my opportunity to serve that need. So I can tell you that when I speak about empathy and about how to cultivate an empathetic learning environment, I speak from the heart. I speak from experience. I've walked the walk that many of our nursing students have walked, and when many of us have walked in our journey through nursing. So without further ado, I will share my screen and I'll get started. And if I could just get a thumbs up to let me know that you can see my screen. Awesome. Thank you very much. Give me 1 second. Okay. So today I would like to speak with you about ways that you can work to promote an empathetic learning experience for nurses. There are many of you in attendance who may not teach in an academic institution, but you will find that many of the topics and concepts that I cover in this presentation can be applied in practice as we mentor and precept new nurses to our units, socialize new nursing staff to practice, and engage learners who visit our work environments. Conflicts and disclosures, neither the planner or the presenter have any real or perceived vested interest that can relate to this presentation. So to get started, some of the objectives that I plan to cover are to explain the importance of inclusivity in the environment, describe design thinking and empathetic instructional design, describe the role empathy plays in course design and the learning environment, identify some ways that inclusivity can be embedded into the learning experience while remaining empathetic to learner needs, and describe the importance of promoting critical awareness. So what about inclusivity? An inclusive classroom is an environment where all learners feel supported, both academically and intellectually. They feel a sense of belonging and respect, and they don't feel closed off from the rest of their counterparts. So creating an inclusive classroom helps to break down the silos that might exist, encourages dynamic and productive dialogue between the learners and between the learner and the educator, removes that implicit bias, and celebrates diversity and differences of opinion and thought processes. Now there's a lot on this slide, so I'm going to go through each of these blocks individually. When we talk about an inclusive learning environment, the literature suggests that developing an inclusive learning environment starts with self-awareness. We need to recognize and understand our own voice and our own perspective, and understand that dialogue effectively impacts learners. This requires a thorough self-examination of personally held biases and evaluation of our own social connectedness. Next, we need to develop a dialogue with learners to learn about their backgrounds and experiences. Many times this is done through introduction discussion boards in an online setting, or an icebreaker exercise in the live classroom. For our clinical educators and members of leadership counterparts in the audience, it could just be a short meeting with your patient and the nurse to understand where he, she, they are coming from. As we learn more about our target audience, we should work to include their voice in the discussion by recognizing those perspectives. We should also actively engage in activities of learning by being present on a discussion board or in live classroom events, or available to answer questions when they arise. We should work to foster a positive classroom climate by treating all learners with respect and timely feedback. You should also govern learner-to-learner interactions to ensure that civility and decorum are present. Further, the educator, preceptor, or mentor, whichever role you're filling, should be the source of support and model that behavior that we expect to see. Selecting pedagogical approaches that help to promote the learner's sense of belonging and also fosters inclusivity. This could be ensuring that multiple formats of lecture material or instructional material are present and provided to accommodate for disability or learning needs. And lastly, many students and many nurses are balancing multiple competing priorities that may not have the opportunity to network or engage in aspects of the profession that would foster social belonging, similar to what we're doing here. So consider how you would bring that exposure to those outside organizations and other professional networking offerings to that learning environment or to the work environment. For the online or live setting, think about incorporating panel discussions, podcasts, or webinars. Leverage the power of technology to foster connectedness and improve professional presence. So for educators, creating an inclusive learning environment begins with design thinking. Design thinking is a nonlinear, iterative process used in many fields. In instructional design, design thinking requires the designer to move through 5 phases as indicated on this diagram: empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. Note that empathy is the first step. I'll segue a moment and say that design thinking also parallels the PDSA process often used in quality improvement. So what about empathy mapping? Empathy in course design refers to the ability of a designer to gain an understanding of the problems, the needs, and desires faced by a group of learners through research and inquisition. As we learned in the previous slide, design thinking starts with empathy. The empathy map was designed by Dave Gray as part of a toolkit that he and his colleagues developed called game storming. Empathy mapping can be used if you're an educator or a leader who is socializing a nurse into a new work setting. Empathy mapping is another part of design thinking and is broken into 4 actions: seeing, saying, doing, and hearing. In addition, on this diagram, you'll see pains and gains. We'll talk about that in just a moment. The empathy map requires the educator to consider the following questions related to the target audience. Who are we empathizing with and what's their situation? So put yourself in the seat of the learner. Next, what do we need to do related to the associated learning? Is it related to a job, a decision, or a role of some kind? Is the learning that is planned relevant? What do they see? What is the learner's perspective? What lived experience might have an effect on their perspective? What do they say? Pay attention to their responses and how they will react to the learning experience. For instance, in academia, we do this by way of the interactions in the classroom and surveys. In the clinical setting, we could do this by way of the patient's direct response to the care given and satisfaction surveys. Next, consider, what do they do? What are the experiences that are brought into the classroom, and what value are you placing on those lived experiences? Then focus on what is heard. What is going on in the field that might be impacting that? What is going on in society that might hinder focus, drive, or willingness to persist? And likely one of the most important questions is, what do they think and feel? We think of this as pains versus gains. Pains are associated with their fears, frustrations, and anxieties associated with their learning, or even the environment. Gains are associated with their wants, dreams, needs, and hopes. So next, let's look at the empathy framework. The ability to identify with learners' thoughts and feelings is a key quality and vital for fostering an empathetic learning experience. The empathy framework from Kupri and Visser is illustrated in phases and shows us we need to consider our learners, their hopes, dreams, fears, circumstances, and what they want to accomplish. In the discovery phase, as instructors, leaders, and developers of curriculum, we need to raise our curiosity and explore the needs of learners, their situations, and their experiences that are brought into the classroom with them or into the work environment. In the immersion phase, we need to find ourselves wandering in their world, figuratively speaking. We need to approach understanding the learner's perspective with an open mind. In the connection phase, we need to take time to reflect and recall on our own experiences and memories of the time period of learning where our learners are. What were we faced with? How are we balancing work, life, school? And lastly, in the detachment phase, we need to step back for a moment and capture the full picture of the learner's world. In this phase, we should plan the activities in a course that are relevant and meaningful and address what the learner is trying to accomplish in this time of learning. The same goes in the clinical setting. We need to think about what we're pulling them away from in their work in order for them to learn. So critical awareness involves having an understanding of the 5 spheres of influence, which are social, cultural, political, historical, and ideological, and how they will impact the process of learning and teaching. Promoting critical awareness in the classroom involves transformative learning. Mesereau is credited with developing the transformative learning theory that involves both instrumental learning and communicative learning. Instrumental learning focuses on the task-oriented problem solving, while communicative learning has a focus on how people communicate their feelings, needs, and desires. As depicted in the diagram, of all the spheres of influence must be considered when crafting teaching and learning activities that would be engaging, yet mindful of being inclusive to all learners. Further, as educators, course developers, and leaders, we should be ever mindful of the inquisitive nature and the critical thinking ability of our learners. In doing so, we work to see the learning environment through their lens as well as our own. Another way to create an inclusive and empathetic learning environment is to assist learners in effective time management. Provide effective resources. In the academic setting, we can do this by providing effective course resources such as a syllabus that provides the learners with a clear expectation of the course demands, a list of discussions in advance so that learners who work shift work might be able to prepare their discussion responses ahead of time, a projected time to complete for learning activities in the live, online, or hybrid models. In the clinical setting, we can do this by providing clear instructions related to simulation, lab, and clinical requirements, and the time that will be needed to invest. Demonstrate how to use organizational tools such as course calendars, electronic calendars, different modalities for file storage, etc. Provide how-to videos and guides for the required technology that will be used in a course. Plan assignments that are meaningful and tie into other activities into the course. Consider scaffolding assignments and directly tethering them to discussion questions to maximize the time learner spends in a classroom, and provide helpful reminders and help them to plan ahead. Vulnerability in nursing is another issue to consider. Many nurses, whether engaged in securing an advanced degree, working as a leader, or working at the bedside, verbalize feeling overwhelmed and vulnerable in the profession. With the rise in mental health issues, workplace violence, and work-related stress, nurses are feeling vulnerable, overworked, and pushed to the brink. We need to work to meet nurses where they are, provide them with what they need to thrive in the profession. Offering empathy while they learn or acclimate to a new work setting is just the tip of the iceberg. As we can see depicted on the diagram, taking an empathetic approach to teaching, mentoring, guiding, and socializing to the workplace may not tip the scales, but it serves to combat some of the negative effects that these vulnerabilities impart. Walt Disney is quoted as saying, "The way to get started is to quit talking and begin doing." Take time to reflect on your own thoughts and perspectives. Find ways to invite collaboration in the learning environment or wherever teaching is taking place. Continuously self-evaluate your own communication, self-correct, and be sure that the receiver of the information has verbalized clear understanding. Make sure the learning environment is safe in all ways for the learner. Take time to do a pulse check and evaluate for extraneous emotion that might exist and work to reduce the intensity. Work to foster development and professional socialization in each encounter with the learner. These are all effective interventions that require no external tools, no elaborate technology, just simple yet thoughtful human interface coupled with time to make it all happen. In the learning environment, the instructor, teacher, mentor can invite collaboration in several ways. Challenge the learners to engage in group work. Develop interprofessional collaborative exercises to encourage learners to think beyond their own professional boundaries. Host a forum using a web meeting platform like we're doing today. Read and act on learner suggestions. In the clinical environment, the educator or nursing leader could engage the staff in debriefing on a recent incident. Foster interprofessional collaboration on a key healthcare issue that impacts multiple disciplines. Extend the reach of educational offerings through recorded webinars. Consult staff on educational needs and work to satisfy those needs. Improving communication, bring down silos, and help to give learners a voice, whether you're working in a live setting or from afar, by effective two-way communication and responsiveness to questions and emails in a timely manner. Being mindful and observant of cultural and communication preferences, and working to contour the language and illustrations used in the course or used in any of the learning material to be inclusive of all learners. Plan for the busy learner and create pathways for open communication, either live or asynchronously, using available and embedded technologies. As nurse educators or leaders, we strive to create safe spaces for expression, whether we are dealing with patients and their family members, fellow staff members, or learners. Consider that each individual brings a certain degree of talent and skill, but also are predisposed to other burdens, stressors, anxiety, and a host of other issues that may detract from effective learning. Provide a space for open communication, but remain mindful that open expression is respectful and is focused on the topic. Be present in the moment with the learner. Exercise empathy and try to mentally place yourself in the seat of the learner. Foster development and work to provide ongoing opportunities, learning, development, and engagement. This is vital for all stakeholders involved in the learning environment, wherever that may be. Effective development and professional socialization to the role are vital and have an impact on the learning performance of all involved. To all in attendance, you possess the power to pave the pathway to increasing the efficacy of learning, whether your audience is in the classroom, online, at the bedside, or beyond. In closing, I draw your attention to some of the images presented on this slide. These images were also threaded through the presentation. This was intentional and done to not only visually tie concepts together, but also provide imagery that might serve to soothe. Empathy must be considered a fluid process. The images of the expanse of the ocean depict just that, the ebb and flow of thoughts and feelings without barriers, or the expanse of the open road that serves as an analogy of the limitlessness of inspiration that we can provide another through the use of empathy. I hope you have found this presentation both informative and soothing to the senses. Here are some references and some good reads. Thank you. And here's some prompts for our discussions.
Thanks so much, Nancy. Tracy, if it's possible to have those prompts visible to everybody once we break out. But so for those of you that are joining us for the first time, one of the things we do in our trusted conversations is that after the presentation, we take a little time to break into triads, and it gives us an opportunity to have some discussion related to the presentation. That has a couple of different intentions. The first is to give us a chance to dive a little bit deeper into the content. But the other thing is that every time we break into triads, you get an opportunity to meet a couple of new people. And one of the things that we're trying to do in Nurse Trust is to really be intentional about deepening the relationships between our members. So Nancy, thanks so much for that great presentation. And Tracy, do you have any further instructions for us as we move on to the next step?
We will divide up into triads and we'll have about 30 minutes there, and then we'll come back together and we can reflect on the small group conversations and share with the larger group. We'll just be randomly assigning everyone, and I will get those questions into the chat there, so you'll have those as you go into the conversations. So
Another alternative is what I do sometimes is to take a picture of the prompts. So if any of you want to do that, as Tracy's scrambling, since I didn't ask her to do that before, thank you, Tracy. You are always so willing to transition. I'm seeing that Janet Terry is indicated. Oh, you got it already. Jennifer Walsh and Janet Terry have both left. So as you're putting groups together, Tracy, I guess if they're both gone, once you hit the button, it'll all take care of itself.
yeah. So we're gonna create them now, and you'll be prompted to join your group.
Great, thank you. See you in 30 minutes.
Welcome back.
You're crazy.
See, we're starting to get everyone back in here into the main room.
Welcome back.
We're so deep into that conversation.
Good, good. You want to jump in and tell us a little what you experienced?
Oh, I thought well, the one things that we experience in our group, we'll talk about supporting student suicidal, and then what else? What can student experience in the classroom, in clinicals, and what we'll do to support either students, faculty members, or each other. What else? We had great conversation, and then different members give different point of view. And can someone else speak up?
Thank you, Yolene.
You're welcome.
What bubbled up for some of the rest of you? And it was a rich conversation, Nancy. Thank you. You guided us in the right direction.
So we had some conversations about challenging students, and not the active verb of challenging students, but the adjective students who are challenging. And differences in how faculty might approach such students, and shared some stories of our own experiences.
Thanks,
Okay,
Jacqueline. Yeah, that's an interesting perspective.
In our group, we talked about messaging, I mean, ultimately messaging, not just to students, but to staff, and how to be kind of considerate as to where they're coming from. I don't want to steal Nelson's thunder, but he shared a really great example of student who was having issues with a DNP and had to make a really challenging life decision, and that you can save some, but you can't save them all. And using some out of the box thinking when a student runs into an issue where they're paired off with a mentor, they're doing a DMP or they're doing a capstone, they're paired off with a mentor. What happens if their life situation changes and their job situation changes and they're no longer at the place where they're doing their project? I mentioned that some of the new curriculum development that I'm doing for CSU is building that in. We're building that into our experiential learning so that we leverage technology. So if the student does come to a situation where they maybe have to leave and go to a new organization or their mentor left, how can we still continue the project and not lose all that time and effort? So that's kind of a summary of some of the things we discussed.
Nancy, I'll echo back. I also want to highlight what you just said. Sometimes when we respond to an email or forward an email, if you could share what you do with the heading.
Yeah, sure. A lot of us who teach online, we use a learning management system, and sometimes we'll message students right from the grade book. It's something I learned a very long time ago, but changing the subject line, making sure that it doesn't have a negative connotation. And the same thing when you're forwarding emails or you're replying to all. Check the RE line and make sure that you're changing it and updating it so that it calls attention to those who need to address the email. And making sure that we're using central messaging that's positive and supportive. I think, like my grandmother used to say, you get a lot more with honey than you do with vinegar. So, that old adage. But, like when students are missing assignments, to Nelson's point, he says he sends like a gentle email that kind of nudges them. And it's not calling them out. It's just like, guess what? I noticed you weren't there. It's not a negative thing. I've done the same, and I've had plenty of students reach out and say, thank you for that email because I was so caught up in work. I forgot it was Wednesday and we had to post. They just forget what day it is. And we've been there, especially when you're working long 12-hour shifts, they all run into each other. So just those kind of things.
In our group, Mary Joan offered an important piece of the prompt. She asked about simulation and how we find a way to bring in aspects of empathy, vulnerability, emotion into a simulation experience. And Gia, I see you're not on camera, but if you're with us, I'd love for you to talk a bit about the family caregiver and the fact that you brought that into your simulation experiences, having focused on family caregiving in my doctoral work and had a really interesting personal experience. Just leave it at that, unless there's a counselor in the room. Anyway, Gia, go ahead.
So I just shared with the group that a lot of times students show up to the simulation and they're like, oh, it's just a mannequin. And they're like really lackadaisical about it. And so what I would do as a clinical instructor is actually play the family member in the room of the patient that they were taking care of. Like I would really go all out. Like sometimes I'd hollering and screaming or crying or angry at the nurse. Like I'd do everything I could to make it seem like a real situation. And it was amazing to see the transformation in not doing that versus the students, how they became so involved because they wanted to make sure that they took care of me too as a family member. So adding that human element to the simulation was really helpful in pulling that empathy out of the students for the patients.
Yeah, Gia, I'm going to take the opportunity to really highlight the role of the family caregiver. We have a daughter who's 33 who has Down syndrome, and that's one of the reasons I got interested in it. And then my dad had dementia for 7 years. So being on the family caregiver side of it really helped me to recognize that the research for a long time has said that the family caregiver is essentially invisible to a lot of us as professionals. And I'll go beyond that and say in some of the things that I've read, we go beyond the family member being invisible. sometimes the family member we sense as professionals that the family member is getting in our way. And they are somehow or another keeping us from doing the work that we need to do. So thank you for bringing up the family caregiver, Gia.
Sure.
I just like the echo to Gia. That is like truly innovative. That's innovative. And like a lot of schools, if you have the budget, will use actors and things like that. But it's great because it's coming from you, and you're running the event. So kudos to you.
Thank you.
And I want to welcome Stephen. He joined us a little late. He sent me a note that he had a sick patient that came in his clinic. Stephen, we're glad you came in. Thanks for being here. You're on mute.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you, guys. I'm so sorry I was behind. I got caught up with a patient who was not doing well, and I'm in an outline clinic today. So it's always a crapshoot out here in Southeast Tennessee. So thank you for letting me join a little late.
Glad you're here. Nancy, I just want to toss a couple of other words out. One of the things that you said was extraneous emotions, being aware of extraneous emotions. And I will bet that brings up some sort of immediate memory for some of us. But the other word that you used that I thought was important for us to consider as we continue to discuss, and that is our own vulnerability. So I just want to offer those two words, extraneous emotions and vulnerability.
And I was thinking about, when you're working, so one of my backgrounds is labor and delivery, and, we used to kind of think, I think when we had a bad baby situation or, a crisis event, that you needed to shove everyone out in the hall and, deal with it. And really, that just creates so much more anxiety because now they don't know what you're doing at all. And so even being able to say, we really need to deal with this right now. We will talk through it when we can, so that they are at least acknowledged, whether it's a student who maybe has to kind of be back in the background, or a family. And, in my case, it was usually the parents. But at least acknowledging them very briefly and saying, we want to focus on your baby right now, or your loved one, or whatever, and we'll talk through it later. But sometimes being there, they realize how hard you are working to try and help their person to survive or to become better or whatever. And from a student's perspective, sometimes they can feel so like a fish out of water, because like maybe they feel like they should know what to do, or to, or someone will yell at them to get some kind of equipment, which they have no idea what it is. And so giving them that permission that, it's okay to be right back here, and we'll debrief later. We'll talk about, things later, so that both sides would have an opportunity to talk through it. I don't know. I just found in my practice, when I was practicing in labor and delivery, that it felt like they're just part of the fabric. Then they aren't this person that I've got to get out in the hall, or, they care just as much or more than I do about their baby that I'm trying to save right now. So that's just a thought about vulnerability, and trying to let others also see what you're trying to do to take care of their loved one.
And I'll piggyback on that, Teresa, that absolutely, that vulnerability. I think my experience is from the student perspectives, that vulnerability, sometimes they just want to be heard. They just want someone to hear them, whatever it is, not necessarily the solution, but just, I want to be acknowledged and I want to be heard. And it can come as just, that phone call, especially when, Nancy was talking about stress and vulnerability, but listening to students, what's going on with your life outside of academia? Are you dealing with food insecurity? What are the issues? And we can get the resources, but just giving them an opportunity to have a voice and empowering that and to be heard is part of empathy, I think, for me.
To your point, Teresa, as an operating room nurse, I also helped in labor and delivery and C-sections because I helped the educator, and you get pulled over there. So you're involved in some stressful situations because it's just not just one patient, it's two patients. And then you have to worry about the significant other and their reactions. And I think that it's where that compartmentalization comes in for the nurse, that you need to compartmentalize all that you may be feeling about the whole situation, because there's urgency. You have to make sure that you're doing things and that you're pacing yourself and that you're not making the loved one upset at the same time. So it's a very tender balance, but it's important to note that the nurse who is actually managing that situation that you describe, they also need empathy. They also need a time to decompress, because that compartmentalization that it wears on you. So it's when, like after the case, you just need to take a breath, process it, and then allow yourself enough time to feel, because you're fighting for a life. So, allow yourself time to feel. And I think that's where that self-evaluation, that self-acknowledgement, that's where it's kind of, an important part of the process. Even when we're teaching others, you're precepting someone, and you're in that situation and the patient's going bad. You can't let them see you freak out. You have to just, it's okay, because ultimately we have to stay calm under pressure. Because we have to just think through that problem to the solution. And I think modeling that behavior helps them too. And just to your point, I think debriefing after the fact is really important. To Gia's point, in the kind of scenario, the role playing that you're doing, I imagine that you engage in some debriefing after that, because there's some processing that has to come along that cements the concepts that you're trying to impart. Is that after the fact? Let's look at everything retrospectively.
Nancy, you said a few simple words that just hit me right here. Take time to feel. Take the time to feel. Most of you are familiar with heart math. For me, heart math reminds me to slow things down. Thank you for those words. Take time to feel.
I wanted to pipe in a little bit here. Can you guys hear me? I'm sorry if
Sure.
Yeah, so I think sometimes I'm in cardiology, and so frequently I find myself in code situations and situations with my heart failure patients where I'm counseling families and patients in regards to things like end-of-life care and hospice and palliative care. And I find that over the years, I've been practicing 25 years here in Knoxville, and I've had to constantly sort of practice centering skills before I go into some of those situations. And so I think that's tied to sort of that feeling of it and taking time sort of to center yourself going in. Breathing skills become relevant. So deep breaths and centering your mind so that you're settled and you're into a situation where you're trying to engage with people in a way that's not just so much about you, but about the situation and figuring out where people are. But I think that those centering skills are extremely important for us to continuously practice and to teach students. I've got a student coming this Thursday that I'm precepting, and we're going to have a conversation about centering before we go into the clinical area. And so I just think that's important as well.
Thank you, Stephen. I'd like to acknowledge that we have some of the folks in the room who haven't spoken yet, and just want to sort of open up the door for you to jump in if there's something you'd like to say.
I'll jump in. I had the kind of coincidence, but I don't really believe in coincidence. I think everything happens for a reason. Where I had been gone on leave for a few days, but right before I left, I was grading a paper of a student who is truly an A+ student, but this paper was not, I even questioned whether she had written it because it was just so different from her normal writing. And so I appropriately gave her some comments, but then I just acknowledged that, you know, sometimes life gets in the way and we can't focus on school, and that's okay. And that, you know, I hope that whatever she was dealing with was something that she had the right support for. And then I offered up student services because she works at our university hospital, and sometimes it's hard to seek out services at the place you work. And so I said, but at student services, you're a student, you're not in your role that you are in leadership in the hospital. And so, and when I got back, today is my first day back. And when I got back, she'd written me a lovely email just saying how she appreciated, one, that I acknowledged that she wasn't at her best, and that wasn't the typical person she is, and that I offered support and really, you know, met her where she was at and didn't chastise her for that, but just really offered help and support and gave her resources. So it fit right in with our topic today, and reinforce that that's the right thing to do. Being a new faculty member, I shared with Jackie that, you know, sometimes I'm not sure of all the right things I'm supposed to do, or the rules that I might be breaking if I don't do it right. So it was very poignant for us, and I appreciate the dialogue we had in our group about that.
Thank you, Penny. Anybody else that hasn't spoken yet that wants to jump in, you're welcome to. Nancy, I've got a little something I'm going to do right as we're wrapping up at the end, but I want to give you the opportunity to share anything that you've gotten out of this feedback. Thank you.
I'd just like to thank everyone for your openness and the conversation, the dialogue, sharing your best practices. I think that, you know, it's when I'm preparing this presentation, and I have thought about this before in curriculum design and development, it's the same thing I thought when I came to nursing as an older person. You know, I say older, I wasn't in my 20s, I was in my late 30s, and walking the floor and doing my job. The one thing I noticed was the lack of communication. And communication is the simplest intervention that we have in our toolbox as a nurse. Effective communication is just, it's simple. It doesn't cost us anything. A little bit of time, maybe a little bit of thought and mindfulness, but, you know, and how we communicate to one another and our patients, because they can feel us before they can hear us. Our students can too, because a patient has all day to lay there and think. We're busy, so we come in and they get a piece of us. The same thing with our students, they get a piece of us. So let's give them the best piece. And how do we give them the best piece? By, to Stephen's point, is just, you know, be mindful. Take a little mental inventory. Take a deep breath before you walk into the patient. You may have just had a really terrible altercation with a doctor. Take a deep breath, because it's not their bag to carry. And like I used to say to my OR students who I had a peri-op bridge program that I ran, is that We all have bags. We all have stuff that we have to carry. Leave those bags at the door, because your counterparts in work, the patients that you serve, and anyone else you come in contact with, they don't need to bear the fruits of what's in that bag. And if you should choose to pick that bag up when you leave at the end of your shift, that's on you. But chances are you'll have left it, and it'll have disintegrated by the time you've ended your shift. So that's kind of how I've handled life as a nurse. That's kind of how I handle life as a teacher. And it's how I build curriculum. I always tell, and Bonnie laughs every time I say this, we've worked together for quite some time. She knows what I'm going to say. I sit in a swivel chair for a reason. I'm constantly pivoting and changing my lens, changing my focus to try to look at things from all different perspectives, so that I can give our students the most holistic experience, but being mindful of them and what they're bringing to the classroom.
Thank you so much, Nancy. But what I'd like to do now is I just put in the chat. I'd like for you to think of two things. The first is, what's a gift that you received from being here today? Whether that gift was from Dr. Belushi's presentation, or maybe from the conversation that you had when we broke into triads, or this subsequent discussion. So what was one gift that you received? And the second is, what's a commitment that you're going to make going forward? There was just so much rich information here today that if you would put in the chat a gift that you got, and the second thing I'd like you to each put in the chat is a commitment that you might make going forward. I'll put examples of mine. You know, my own commitment is a greater awareness. The gift was a greater awareness of vulnerability and emotion. And then the commitment that I'm making is to practice vulnerability. So if you would put that in, and then what we'll do is we'll capture that, and I'll write a little synopsis. I think we had a great conversation, Nancy. And I think we got enough time to just open up the floor. If there's anything that any of you want to share, please feel free to jump in. I would encourage you to be lean of speech. Not that lean. Got some great things popping up here, and I'll read them if that's okay. Mary Joan, more intentional listener. The others I'll read without the names. Gift, being with Penny, a Pitt alum. That's one of the really neat things, Jacqueline, is the opportunity to come across people here. Tracy, the gift is a community of caring people. Thank you, Tracy. Enriching conversations, commitment to better practice of empathy. The words of wisdom, being intentional about being empathetic. A bounty of great exchange of ideas, commitment to be mindful of others' vulnerabilities. Certainty, the gift of Nancy. Certainly, Nancy was a gift, certainly. Thank you, Nancy. Commitment to continue to listen and be empathetic. Remove negativity, a commitment to remove that negativity from the subject line. Common themes across colleagues in a practice setting, commitment to practice empathy and vulnerability. Thank you, Stephen. Gift that I had the opportunity to meet in person the former dean of my alma mater. Oh, what a great gift. And commitment to practice openness and listening. And Gia had to log off. Gia is at Emory, and we were in the same group. Great gift. Bonnie, I received a gift as a better understanding of empathy framework, commitment to practice empathy with patients, students, and with me. Thank you, Bonnie. That's important. We often are putting our empathy for ourselves at the end of the line. Well, that's pretty much all we had today. Nancy, again, thank you for taking the time to put this together for us and giving us an opportunity to explore aspects of empathy and vulnerability in our workspaces. We will see you again in another month for another trusted conversation, and we'll have speaker and topic soon to let everybody know. Thanks very much. We
Thanks,
appreciate you all.
everyone.
Bye-bye.